You're listening to the Sketchnote Army Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook, and this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey everyone, it's Mike, and I'm here with my friend Tanmay Vora. Tanmay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. I'm thrilled to be on the show today.
Well, I'm excited to have you. I've been watching all the work you've been doing, and it's very exciting to have you on and to have you talk about the work you're doing and the impact you're having, specifically in India, but I think internationally. Everyone in this space is having an international impact, which is super cool. So, first of all, tell us who you are and what you do.
So, of the many identities that I have, the ones that I'm living more passionately these days is the identity of a business leader, an author, and an illustrator. Most people know me more from my sketchnote work because the work itself is so distinct and personal that people identify me more as a sketchnoter. But I primarily work on these three identities. A lot of my work that I share on the internet and elsewhere, it is at the intersection of visual thinking, and leadership learning and change consulting. So in a way, what I do with visual sketchnoting feeds my consulting work. And when I do consulting, it basically feeds my visual thinking practice. So it's a sort of nice symbiotic relationship between the two areas that I work. I'm the founder of QS Part Consulting. It's less than a year that I started my own consulting practice in the peak of pandemic. And there I work on two areas. One is capability services, where I help organizations build their strategic capabilities, processes, culture, people, talent. And the other part is clarity services, where I do visual facilitation, help organizations see their strategy clearly, see their own ideas clearly. And this involves a lot of sketchnoting, visual facilitation, and stuff like that. My purpose with what I do is that I want to use sketchnotes as a tool to amplify and illuminate ideas worth sharing in the space of leadership, learning, and change. And the aim of all of this is to nurture better leadership and nurture better leaders. Because I've been an organizational leader for 23 years. In my last stint, I was leading a 700 people organization as the country managing director. And I've lived leadership and I've seen it from close quarters. And I feel that there is a substantial need for great ideas to go into the organization so that we can have better leaders and better leadership within the organization. So that's a little bit about what I do and how I use sketchnotes as a tool to propagate ideas worth sharing.
I think what I find interesting, and this you share with my friend Diana Soriat, is she came to sketchnoting from a very business-minded perspective, right? She was a consultant and did all this work in business and could understand a lot of the concepts and knew all the secret terms that the business people were saying. And so it gave her like this edge or this secret weapon. So when she came in as a visualizer, she could speak and understand and parse and not only that, but then show, alternatives that maybe they hadn't thought of as part of her services, right? To say, had you thought about doing this thing or that thing? Because she understood where they were going. And so I wonder, is that part of what you do in the visualization, that second portion that you mentioned, where you do visualization with companies?
Yeah, so we use visuals to plot opportunities. We use visuals to plot possibilities. And saying that if this is what you want to convey, have you considered, and again, I want to emphasize here that I think of visual curation or visual creation of ideas not as passive graphical recording, but as an active co-creation of meaning. So when I work with organizations and authors, and sometimes they mean to say something, but when I create a visual interpretation of it, a new meaning, a more richer sort of meaning, the layer of that meaning is uncovered. And one of the learning consultants, his name is Harold Jarche, he said that when he saw my visual, he looked at possibilities that he did not think of when he was writing an article. And so I think I've come to look at it as active co-creation of meaning. And that's what I have experienced consistently with all the customers that I work with.
That's got to be when I've done that work I specifically did that work with development teams where we would queue up a feature for software. We would look at the old tool and see what did it do well, what did it not do well, where could we go?
Mm-hmm.
And then we would start having this discussion. And while we were discussing, I'm drawing on a big whiteboard and
Mm-hmm.
interpreting this and drawing it out and saying, is that what you mean? And then it really was there was a spirit in the room, or almost, where people were
Absolutely.
getting excited, and then developers would come up and say, "Hey, can I have the mirror or the pen and draw on the board?" And that was always exciting.
Absolutely.
So there was sort of this feeling of co-creation. Now that you put a word to it, that was kind of what we were doing in that space.
Absolutely. And my first experience in visual thinking was back in 2009 when, I don't think I was aware of the term sketchnote, whether I was aware of the term visual thinking, but it just came naturally to me. I was in a sales meeting talking to a vice president of quality in Finland, on a cold January morning. And it was an early morning meeting at around 7 o'clock. I was trying to talk to the vice president of quality who just closed his eyes, leaned back on his chair, and he wouldn't just attend to what I was saying. And I was here presenting a fancy PowerPoint, trying to sell a solution to him, and he just wouldn't listen, or so it seemed. And in a moment, I don't know what happened. I thought I lost the client. So I put down the lid of my laptop, grabbed some markers, went on the whiteboard and started drawing their process. And I said, here is where you have a gap and this is how we can address it and so on. And before I knew, it changed the energy in the room. The gentleman not just opened his eyes up, he walked up to me on the whiteboard and he says that I would like to correct your understanding. And then he started, adding to the whiteboard. And before I knew, the sale was done. I mean, obviously there was a sales cycle to it, but the excitement started with the visual. I went on the whiteboard and we started co-creating solution rather than I being an expert who is trying to propose something and selling. The spirit changed from trying to sell something to trying to co-create a solution. And I think that was the beauty of the first time that I experienced the power of sketchnotes in a very substantial sort of way.
Probably the key moment when you get excited now looking back is, let me correct your interpretation, right? That means
Absolutely.
I'm engaged. And you're starting to get him to co-create, right? He's stepping into the zone with you, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
So that sounds like you're leaning into my next question, which is your origin story. Like, have you drawn since you were a kid? Did you have any troubles in school? Like, stop drawing on your notes? Or, like, tell us that story from when you were a little kid to now, and how did you end up being what you're doing?
So, it's an interesting story that I was never good at drawing in school, and I only to realize later that you don't need to be good at drawing if you want to do visual thinking. But after I cleared my schooling, I was preparing for architecture entrance examination for an architecture course, and during those few months of my vacation when I was in the prep period, I did a lot of drawing, a lot of perspective drawing. We would put earthen pots on the terrace and start drawing and shading them and so on. I cleared that entrance exam as well, but I then did not pursue architecture, and I thought this was it when it comes to drawing. And then I pursued a career in technology, grew through my corporate career to scale the different, organizational peaks, etc. But as I was a new, so drawing, I did some drawing back in time. I've seen my mother doing a lot of drawing as well, but that was from a hobby perspective and not from a professional perspective. But yes, we had an environment where we had some drawing going on all the time in the house. Now, cut to 2006, I was a new first-time manager, and I was given a team, and I was building a team, and I was learning so much about people, so much about how to lead people towards excellence, and I have a background in quality. So I started writing a blog in 2006. This is when Facebook and Twitter were about 2 years old, and nobody heard about it. So I started documenting my lessons on blog, and ever since then, I've been looking for different ways to express myself in a way that A, resonates with my own self, and B, if I share it out there, it resonates with others. And that pursuit brought me to my first book in 2009. This book was called Quality Tweet. It was published in 2009 from Santa Clara. And the format of the book was that it's a book with 140 chapters, and every chapter is one tweet long, which is 140 characters at that point in time. And so every tweet was written in a way that it promotes some lateral thinking. So it's provocative, it's evocative, it leads to a discussion, right? So I wrote all those 140 tweets, and that book, it was very well received because I think it was probably the first or second tweet book in the world. So it was a very novel concept back then. Then I delved into more traditional forms of publishing. I contributed a chapter in American Society for Training and Development's Management Development Handbook. Then I wrote a proper book on Lean Six Sigma in 2014. And I realized that book writing is a tedious process. It's a long process. And by the time the book is released, the ideas would change. So we have to keep up with the rate of the change. And therefore, I then again focused back to blogging. Obviously, I never left blogging, but I was doing it all the while along with my other pursuits. And then in 2015, when I was still in search of different ways to express myself, I could magically see my practice of drawing from early 2000 coming together with my corporate experience and overlapping in an area which is the intersection of visual thinking, leadership, learning, and change. So I stumbled upon Sketchnotes with, thanks to my friend Abhijit Bhaduri. He's a prolific sketchnoter, and in a blog that he wrote about how to sketchnote, I stumbled upon your work almost at the same time. And that's when I picked up, the books. I looked at the online resources. I think you were doing some videos on visual metaphors and stuff like that. And so I consumed all of it to create my first very rudimentary sort of sketch note. I shared it out there, and Abhijit was the first one to say that this is fantastic. And that sort of fed my pursuit. And because I was already writing a lot about management and leadership for like almost 9 to 10 years, I had a lot of ideas. Now I had to just try and convert some of them into visual notes. So I started drawing daily and creating sketch notes every day and sharing what I create on my blog and then on social media. And I think it was in 2015 end that the sketch note started to go viral on Twitter. My follower count increased from about 7,000 to almost 15,000 in about a year.
Wow.
There's a lot of swelling of followers on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and my blog readership went up. And so I thought this is a cool way to, add my own personality into what I share. Because if you write on a keyboard, it does not have personality; it just has fonts. And this had my signature in it. This had my visual signature in it, and that's what I loved the most about it. And then I've never stopped doing sketch notes ever since then. And I've been doing this with a lot of generosity, with the spirit of community and sharing, and it's been fantastic. So my corporate life has given me playground to test my ideas, but sketchnotes gave me an expression that's like unique to me, that's authentic to me, and that resonates with me the most.
So I'm very curious about the story you told earlier with a Finnish customer who you were trying to sell. Where does that fit in the timeline? When did that experience happen? Was it before?
That was before. That was about 6 years before I actually started sketching. And in fact, there's one more story that I want to share here. Is that in year 2001, when we had a lot of customers in US, and US went through the September 11 attacks, and
Right.
The funding just stopped coming, and we were in a situation where we had to be laid off at that point in time. And obviously, I was in technology. I was a software engineer. And I used to be writing a lot of short stories and stuff like that. So when I did an inventory of my skill set in the pursuit of what I do next, I wrote a lot of things on a piece of paper. And then I said, let me circle those things that I really want to do. And then writing and technology. So I circled those two words, writing and technology. And at that point also, I had this magical moment where I saw those two circles, popping out of the paper into the air, and then sort of overlapping to form an intersection called technical writing. And that's how I got back into my corporate career back in 2002. So that was my first powerful experience in terms of making sense of what I want to do next, doing skill inventory and stuff like that. And the fill-in experience was more in 2009. So that probably tells me that I was always a visual thinker, but I never
Mm-hmm.
realized that I was one.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you were applying for architecture school probably is a hint, right? So there's
Mhm.
some aspect of you that's visual, spatial thinking
Yeah,
in that way, right? So it was just maybe a matter of time.
of time. Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about some exciting stuff you're doing now. What are some projects that you can tell us about that you're allowed to tell us about that you're excited about?
Oh, absolutely. I think my first high point in the journey of sketchnoting was in 2018 when I started working with Tiffany Bova, uh, who is the chief innovation evangelist at Salesforce, and she was writing a book called Growth IQ.
I remember that book.
And
Yeah.
she stumbled upon my work, and I wrote the book. I illustrated the book that she wrote, and within 3 months of release, it went on to become a bestseller on Wall Street Journal. And what also happened is that it gave a lot of visibility to my work as well. Subsequently, I did podcast that she started. So I illustrated the podcast with people like Tom Peters, Seth Godin, Aaron Huffington, and one of the cool things we did there was that we printed these sketch notes on a glass frame and we gifted it to those thinkers.
Oh,
So
nice.
in a way, the sketch notes actually went out to those people, and it was really fascinating sort of experience. As of today, what I'm more actively working on is I do a lot of commission work, commission visual curation for customers, and there one of the things that I look for is not just do passive recording of ideas, but also, as I said, look for learning leverage. So when I was looking at sketchnotes, I thought that sketchnote as a tool can be applied to so many different problems in life, but what is the problem that I care the most about? And the answer was leadership, learning, and how do we keep up with the change that's going on.
Hmm.
And so leadership, learning, change became my domain, became my arena in which I would exercise my skill of creating sketch notes and visual interpretations. And so there's been a very focused approach that when I take up a project, I don't look at just how financially rewarding it is, or what kind of company or how big a company is. I look at learning leverage, and this one thing has served me consistently well because in the process of doing a commission work for a customer, I want to make sure that it feeds me intrinsically around my passion areas and not just be a passive recorder of ideas, but more of treating more of it as a learning experience for myself. And that's one thing that has consistently served me well because every project I do then elevates my consulting practice, it elevates my learning, it elevates my understanding of how the world works. And that way it is very rewarding. I'm currently working on three book projects. So these are, spaced between now till June. So I'm working on two authors are in US and one of them is in India. I'm doing what we now call as nudge notes for some of the conglomerates in US. One of them is the top five, one of the top five companies in the world, and the other one is a conglomerate in India with 140,000 employees, and they're going through a lot of their culture change program. So they want, and now when they write emails or when they create posters, etc., they don't get traction. Behavior change is not happening. So they needed visual objects that can become drivers of connection and conversation between people, and more so in the virtual world where people are not sitting with each other and so on. How do we use visual ideas to sort of enable people to connect with ideas? So that has been a very interesting project, and Nudge Notes is something that's doing really well with multiple customers that I work with. I'm also starting to write a visual book on self-directed learning
Hmm.
because I learned sketch notes on my own. Back in time, I learned most of the technologies that I worked with, like Oracle Developer 2000, Visual Basic back in time, right? So I've learned a lot of those technologies on my own. I learned a lot of my leadership lessons on my own. So I've not done an MBA, I've never gone to a class, I've never done a certification, but all that I've done so far has been a result of my own pursuit. And so I'm conceptualizing So my first TEDx talk in 2019 was on self-directed learning, and now I'm converting that entire model into a book, which will be a visual book, of course, and something that I'm actively thinking of. Apart from this, I'm holding a few board positions on companies where I do a lot of executive coaching and organizational consulting. So all of this keeps me really busy these days.
Just a few things, Tanmay. Just 3 books. I was when you said just only 3 books. I was like, only 3 books? That's great. So, one question that pops out of all that is, it's so great to hear that you're doing all these things. And the one that I'm really curious about are nudge notes. Can you describe what they are? You've sort of mentioned it in passing. What defines a nudge note, and how does it work?
So a nudge note is quite simply a form of sketch note that basically builds a conversation one sketch note at a time. So a nudge note does not have to be very descriptive. So it outlines uh, a very simple point. Let's say we're talking about inclusive leadership. So a nudge note says, what does inclusion mean? So defining inclusion, what demonstrates inclusion? Let's say only 3 behaviors that demonstrate inclusion, along with the visual interpretation of that. And then at the end of it, it says pause and reflect. Say, let's step back and reflect. Am I inclusive in my approaches? What can I do better going forward? And so on and so forth, right? So a nudge note outlines an idea and also enables people to step back and reflect on what they've just seen in the visual, right? So it's a sort of gentle nudge along the behavior change spectrum, and it's just one of the nudges, right? Now there are workshops that people do. Then we release nudge notes. It all sort of adds up to the behavior change that we're seeking. So visual is a very powerful tool. And then what organizations have been doing is that they basically compile these nudge notes into a booklet that they give it as handout material to people, so that people can refer to it. They can frame it as a poster. They can use it. And recently, one organization I worked with, they asked me to create a desktop background with a nudge note, saying that we want this background to be on all our desktops, basically, so that when people open their computer, they see a nudge that enables them to connect with the idea and stuff like that. So we've been doing a lot of that nudge notes as well. So I think nudge note is quite simply a small gentle push towards a desired behavior, and that push is now in visual form in hand-drawn sketch.
It's almost like a little seed, like you're planting a little seed of thought, and then you sort of suggest to someone who's reading it, think about this thing, and then not too much, just enough information to get you thinking, and then let you go. Interesting.
Let you go, and then next week we'll give you some more, and then some more, and so it sort of builds a conversation in one bite at a time. So,
are there is there a place that someone could go and look at some of this work? Do you have some of this publicly posted?
So most of the nudge notes I've created are commissioned for customers. Yeah. But I have done a lot of my own sketch notes in nudge note form, so they could go and they can be seen at my website qaspire.
Okay, we'll make sure. The reason I ask is I can imagine someone listening like, I want to see what that looks like because I want to use that format. So we'll make sure and get show notes in the podcast so people can click to it and see what a nudge note looks like. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Well, the next question I have for you is related to this pandemic, which seems like it doesn't want to end. What are the things that you have done and maybe are doing, maybe it's changed, to help yourself from going crazy when you're stuck in the house or you can't do the things you want, or what are some of those solutions you found for yourself to maybe inspire others who are listening with ideas?
So, pandemic has truly worn us out all, and there was a time when I was sucked in the never-ending anxiety of what happens next. Where do we go from here? And I was in the middle of a substantial career transition from being senior corporate leader to being a solopreneur. And somewhere in the midpoint of that transition, pandemic struck us, derailed all my plans. But I think what has kept me going is the pursuit, is the journey, and and realization that sometimes along the journey you don't need to walk a mile. You just need to take the next important step in front of you. So I have been recentering myself in the pursuit rather than on the outcomes. And if I, for example, get up this morning and feel like I want to draw something, or if I feel like I don't want to work today, or if I want to spend some time with kids, I am letting myself flow, going where the energy is. And I think going where the flow is has been my mantra since 2020 till now, which has led me to very interesting places, because when you don't have plan, anywhere you go will sound very interesting because you're not aiming to go anywhere anyway. So it's a very free flow kind of an approach that I've taken to life in last 2 years. Obviously, I focused on building a business because I wanted the business to replace my full-time income source. And very glad that it's turned out really, really well and rewarding from that front as well. But again, I was not aiming for a certain revenue figure or certain types of clients. I was just aiming for contribution. I was just aiming for doing what I do well, day in and day out, just showing up every day and putting myself out there. That was just my very plain strategy. And then people discover the work, they come along, and then we build a business. So building a business for me is more like a byproduct than the pursuit itself. But just doing what I'm supposed to do every day, looking at my dharma, right, which is what is it that I'm meant to do, and how do I do it on a daily basis. Obviously, focus on exercising has really helped. So I've been going to gym quite regularly in last 1 year, focusing on my health and my well-being. And pandemic has given us a lot of quality time with family. So all of that put together has kept me sane. And I try to stay away from news most of the time. I don't read newspapers. Ever since 2009, when I started writing my first book, along with a demanding job, I decided that I had to give up a few things, and some of those things were television and a newspaper. Because I'm very active on Twitter, so I anyway get to read a lot of stuff on out there. So I don't need to spend time watching television or reading newspapers. So that's kept me.
Interesting. That's some good ideas. Especially love the idea of going where the flow of the energy is, because I think that's probably sustainable, right? If you force yourself, I mean, you have to pay the bills, or have to do. Maybe the energy isn't there, but it must be done. Of course, that's normal. But
Absolutely.
for the primary thing, having this focus area, it's really good advice. This episode of the Sketchnote Army Podcast is brought to you by Concepts, an infinite canvas sketching app built for tablets with a stylus, like the iPad Pro, Microsoft Surface, and Samsung Galaxy Tab. Concepts' infinite canvas lets you spread out and sketch in any direction. Everything you draw in Concepts is a flexible vector, so you can move your notes around the canvas or change their color, tool, or size with a simple gesture. Search Concepts in your favorite app store for infinite, flexible sketching. Let's shift into tools. I'm really curious to hear about the tools you use. I think you use digital, I would guess, but I'll let you speak for yourself. Let's start with analog first. Pens, pencils, notebooks, paper. What are the things that you like to use that you maybe could recommend?
Yes, on the analog side, when I started doing sketchnotes, and because I was, in a full-time corporate role, what I would do is I would just pull some A4 size sheets from the printer, fold them into two, and threw myself a constraint that I have to create a sketchnote in half of the A4 size paper. And I created about 150 sketch notes that way. So I would, draw on that sheet with pencil and put it in my draft folder. Then go home and create a full-blown sketch note. So ink it later, but first I would with pencil. And that also shaped my approach, because then I am now doing a lot of pencil first sketch notes. So my original sketch note work happens in pencil, and inking happens later on. So I used Staedtler fine liner pens, 0.5, 0.7, and I also used a lot of signature pens to add emphasis onto my sketchnotes. I've never used highlighters, but the process I used in analog sketchnoting was that I would do it pencil first, then I would ink it. I would then click a photograph of it in my digital SLR camera, take it to Photoshop, and then just clean it up a little bit. Maybe add some colors in the closed spaces that I've drawn with a black pen. I would just add some colors
Mm.
and then push it out on social media. So that's been my practice on the analog side of things. On the and so I don't have any specific preference on paper, because for me a blank piece of paper just works fine. But I've been using these A4 sized sketchbooks from a company called Paper Box in India,
Mm.
and they're really good quality sketches that I could create using this book. But no preference on the paper, more focus on expression. Um, in 2018, later part of 18, I moved to digital, and I got myself an iPad Pro 10.5 inches with a pencil. Um, I also got myself a paper-like screen cover
Mhm.
because it gives me that tactile feeling of drawing.
Yes.
Um, and then initially I started using paper by WeTransfer, paper by 53 back then.
Hmm.
And I think I love the simplicity of it, and I know you love it as well.
Yeah.
But then I graduated to Procreate purely because my approach was pencil first, and therefore having layers that I could make visible and invisible at any given point in time gives me a lot of flexibility to to really make sure that the thing that I share out in the world is more finished. Those sketch notes are not meant to be finished products, I know, but I have a certain preference of how it should go out
Mm.
there, and Procreate just serves that purpose really, really well. And so layers is my most loved feature in
Mm.
there. I'm not a very advanced sort of pro user of Procreate, but just an average user who knows how to work his way around
Mm.
in
And so would you create like a layer and do the pencil, and then when
yeah.
you feel like it's in the right place, maybe dim it or something, and then create another layer for the inking and do your normal. So you're basically replicating your analog process in a digital tool. Would that be the right way to think of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
That's exactly how it works. And I also have, so now my sketch notes have structure where there is a pencil layer, then there is a layer where I put the title, then there is content
Mm.
layer and visual layer. So content is done on a certain layer, visuals are done on a separate layer, highlights and so highlighting, so the background highlighting happens on a different layer, and then pencil is a different layer.
Hmm. And then probably the thing you were used to be doing with Photoshop, where you would scan, bring it in, and add color. Now you're just doing it on a layer in Procreate, right?
Exactly.
Achieving the same
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. So that's sort of eased my process a lot. So I don't have to worry about all the logistical aspects. I just need to focus on getting the representation right and not worry about all the logistics
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So it's really been a boon for me discovering Procreate. And by the way, I still use paper by WeTransfer for a lot of my uh, unstructured notes. So let's say I'm listening to a podcast and I want to write down three big ideas, right? So I write it down on paper by WeTransfer. I do a lot of my personal planning and to dos and stuff like that in those notebooks that paper
Mm.
provides. So it's a very then there I don't want to worry about layers and technique. I just want to put it out there, and so iPad becomes my one-stop shop for all kinds of note taking.
Mm. Yeah, I think the thing I like about paper is because it is so constrained and focused, you don't have much time
Hmm.
to fiddle around with, oh, what brush should I use, or which layer is this on? You just build stuff. So I can see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, great set of tools. It sounds like you're a very focused person who uses simple tools, nothing fancy per
Yeah.
se, which is nice because it takes the tool discussion a little bit off the table and more focused on content creation, which is kind of what you were talking about there. So
Absolutely.
now let's imagine there's someone listening, probably is, who is into visualization of some kind, whatever they are into,
Mhm.
and they love it, but they feel like they're maybe in a circling pattern or on a plateau, and they need a little inspiration just to rise above. What would be three things you might say to that person to encourage them or give them some inspiration?
Yeah. So when I started my sketchnoting practice, one of the things that served me really well was integrating, the visual way of working my everyday tasks. So, for example, I would anyway do a to-do list. How do I turn my to-do list into some form of visual? For example, what I would do is that my to-do list would define what I do in the day, but at the end of the day, I would sit back and reflect on uh, how was my day today, how productive was I, did I accomplish, am I happy, and so on. And the simplest rating that I would give to each day back in time was through a set of emoticons.
Mm.
So I would draw an emoticon to represent the day, and I would say that today was a fantastic day, or today was a neutral day, or I wasn't happy with how I spent my day, and so on. So, and then I extended that to, let's say, clean eating, exercising, and I would say that how do I review myself visually, right? So instead of tracking my goals on apps and stuff like that, I started tracking them on a piece of paper in my diary, with emoticons. So I think the simplest way to do it is to just start and keep at it, and make it a part of daily routine rather than trying to do it specially
Mm.
in a day, because we are we are bombarded with information and priorities all the time. And if we just step back and do it in a way that sort of helps us become better, then we are not doing visual thinking. We are actually using sketch notes or visuals as a tool to improve ourselves. And I think that's a very powerful way to also build your visual vocabulary, make practice a part of your pursuit, and not do it like in a very grand sort of fashion.
Mm.
The second thing that helped was that when I started sharing it with community, um, now people are looking up for from they're looking up to me for sharing something meaningful all the time. And that sort of means that I have to keep up at it, right? So community keeps you at it, and it's easy to give up if you are doing it all alone. But if you are doing it in a community, if you are sharing, if you're doing what we are doing in the service of something or someone, I think that changes the whole perspective. The third thing is that constraints have really helped me, because I am clear that I don't want to uh, be the best sketchnoter out there. I think what I want to do is I want to use sketchnotes and visual thinking as a tool to advance ideas. And so I've given myself a lot of constraints. Back in time, as I said, I used to tear up an A4 size paper into two, and I would just use that small space to create a sketch note. Now I work with fixed canvas sizes, a fixed set of brushes, so I don't have to think about how do I make this creatively beautiful and nice. That's not the point. The point is how do I represent and capture the idea most effectively. So constraints really help you keep on the track. So we can throw in constraints like what kind of visuals we want to create, what colors we want to use, what material, what type of tools we want to use. And those they basically not just help you become more effective, but also constraints helps us in bringing out a unique expression and unique style. That's what I've learned. So these would be my top three things: integrate visuals into your day-to-day flow of work, share it generously with the community, and then throw in some constraints and build your own visual style. That's very unique to you.
Mm. I love those tips. And they tie so well together. And as you know, I'm a big believer in constraints. So I think
Yeah,
often that can be a solution to many problems by limiting your options. It sort of forces you to be creative within a box in a sense. So really good. Really good.
absolutely.
So Tanmay, it's been so good to have you. How can someone find your work, see your work? What do you have a website, or is there social media where you hang out the most, where someone might go first?
Yeah, so my website is a repository of all my work. All that I do, I share it first on my website, and then use social media as the outposts
Hmm.
for all the content that I create. So people can find me on my website at qaspire.com. It's Q as in quality and aspire as in ambition. So qaspire.com. And I'm also very active on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. And my handle on all these three platforms is at TNVORA.
Got it. And we'll, of course, as always, put these in the show notes. So if you're driving somewhere or washing the dishes and you can't get your hands out of the water, you can go back and look at the links in the show note and on the website and all those places. So I hope that you reach out to Tanmay and let him know how he did. I think he did great. And make a new connection. We have a great community, a really vibrant community, and I'm so pleased that you're part of it and all the contributions you've given thank you so much for the work you've done, Tanmay.
And likewise, Mike, I'm extremely grateful for you and Mauro, because my first high point was when my rough sketchnote was featured on Sketchnote Army
Yeah.
back in time. That was one of the high points, and it sort of fed me in a very different way. So thank you for doing that work, and thank you for encouraging so many of us out here in pursuing visual thinking as tool, as a practice. I think it has made the world a much better place. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, thanks so much, Tanmay. I appreciate those kind words. Well, for everyone who's watching or listening, this wraps another episode of the Sketchnote Army Podcast. Until the next episode, talk to you soon. The Sketchnote Army Podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohde Design Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of AMP Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon, or go to peachpit.com and use the code ROHDE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends, and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.